Woo! Woo! All right. If you don't think I wasn't making those sounds when I walked into the theater on December 17th with the most beautiful woman on the planet right next to me, woo! The lovely and hyper-intelligent Dr. Stephanie Murphy was there. Oh, yes. We sat down. The crowd was wild. Everything. I don't want to get woo-woo on anybody. I'm an atheist. But the energy, you could feel it. And man, when the credits started rolling, or not the credits, but the opening crawl started, the claps they wouldn't stop. And even the local radio station was there. It was wild. It was a wild time. One of the wildest times I've ever seen in New Hampshire. Okay, Stephanie's looking at me like I'm nuts.
I didn't feel anything.
You didn't feel, okay. Of course, if you wanted to hear Stephanie's comments on the whole Star Wars gig, you can listen to last week's episode during the climax. She talked about it, and she, overall, with the Star Wars saga, she loved the movie. But with the Star Wars saga, she was less than impressed. And it's an interesting point to bring up, and I'll be talking about that more myself, because last week I said I will be saving my opinions for right now. And you've got me for a whole hour, baby, talking about Star Wars. And I have a couple listener questions that I'm going to get to about Star Wars as well during this. But again, spoilers, they're going to run wild on this segment. And it's the rest of the episode. Sorry, no more tech news. It's all Star Wars from here on out. Until next week anyway. But yes, it was amazing. The environment, everything about it was really great. It was exactly what I wanted. It was a packed theater. The whole, there was a couple showings at the one we were catching in New Hampshire here. Just phenomenal. And Star Wars right now. So of course I'm talking about Star Wars, The Force Awakens. This is episode 7. It is the latest entry into what many, including myself, consider to be the greatest collection of films, at least with the original trilogy, to have ever been produced. In fact, I've infamously said in the past on Free Talk Live and on Sovryn Tech that, if aliens came down to Earth and said, give us your best cup of coffee and your greatest work of art that you've ever done, or we'll destroy your planet, I would immediately hand over to them the original trilogy. I would hand them 4, 5, and 6 and say, look, this is the greatest thing we've ever made. That doesn't mean now, of course, Stephanie and I talked last week and said that, what's better, Star Trek or Star Wars? Of course, we all agreed that Star Trek was far superior to Star Wars. But regardless, episode 4, 5, and 6 have a very special place in the hearts of many. And they are technically incredibly well done films, especially episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back, is a near, I consider it a perfect film, as in you never really see the flaws. You can find out about them later, but when you watch it, like you can find out that some of the asteroids were potatoes and all of this. But when you watch it, you don't notice anything. As to where, the only other movie that I actually almost gave that credit to was The Matrix. The very first Matrix. I love the whole trilogy, but the very first Matrix, I thought it was a perfect film. But then I saw the point when watching the DVD where Neo does a flip away from Agent Smith out of the way of a train, and you can see where Keanu Reeves grabs hold of the strings that are pulling him up. And it's like, oh, God damn it. The effects department failed there. Otherwise a flawless film. So Star Wars holds a special place as, being one of those rare instances where an absolutely perfect film gets created, especially for its time, considering Empire Strikes Back was made in 1980. And of course, we are talking about a saga that's been going on since 1977. An incredible thing. And right now, The Force Awakens, the latest entry, episode 7, has really achieved, or at least is going to achieve, probably by the time that this gets released, this episode here that I'm doing gets released, has achieved what I really only wanted it to achieve. Honestly, going into episode 7, I wasn't that concerned with whether or not it was going to be a good or bad film. I wasn't concerned with what J.J. Abrams was going to do. I was going to see it just because it was Star Wars, but it's not just because, I just love Star Wars so much, yada, yada. Yes, that's part of it, but there's more. I went in there, I laid down the money because I wanted to make sure that it broke every record out there. Because right now, pretty much every record as far as opening weekends, though I think opening weekend, that might be held by Jurassic World now, which I'm not so mad about that. But opening weekend, box office sales, all of this is generally held by movies that I consider to be pretty lackluster, terrible, or maybe even ridiculous. Titanic, in particular, is the one I'm talking about. Now, Avatar is at the top of the list. And of course, I'll go into the numbers in a minute, but that's all I wanted. And I know that it was coming from a teenage version of myself. I wanted Titanic to get put down in the rankings of highest grossed films of all time. I wanted Star Wars to take back the crown. And this weekend it did that. It's scheduled to do 700 million, which I think Titanic was at 658, something like that. So it's going to smoke Titanic. No question. And part of this was, when I was in high school, and I've kind of, on Sovryn Tech a few times I talked about this. I mean, I've been I'm a lifelong geek, nerd, etc. I've talked about this often, but back then in the 90s, see now it's so cool for everybody to wear fucking Doctor Who dresses and for everybody to be into Supernatural or whatever bullshit shows out there. Okay, now it's cool. In the 90s, it wasn't cool. In the 90s, if you walked around with a book like, say, the Star Wars Essential Guide to Vehicles and Vessels, or the Essential Guide to Droids and Characters, something like that, that was not okay. Sorry, you get you get the scarlet letter put on you, and you are not to be talked to, young man. And I remember hearing and it was so funny because I figured, well, okay, so they don't like my fandom. They don't like that I'm so passionate about something. And then Titanic came out while I was in high school, and oh man, people walking around with those goddamn DiCaprio books, with Leonardo DiCaprio on the cover and the Titanic, and everybody's listening to the soundtrack and everything to it. And Celine Dion was the biggest shit on the planet and whatever. I don't mind Celine Dion. But the level of fandom around Titanic was preposterous because, and this was the thing, it was so inconsistent. Because I would say, because in 97, they re-released the Star Wars films. And I was like, yeah, I'm going to go see these movies a shit ton of times. I'm going to go to the theater every night if I could. And I did see them a bunch of times in theaters. And I remember getting laughed at saying, that's so stupid. Why would you go see a movie that many times? But then those same people, and hell, I can even remember the names. Those same people were seeing Titanic 5, 6, 7, 10. What was that woman on Oprah? She said she saw it 30 times. They're going to, it's okay when it's Titanic. It's not okay when it's Star Wars, right? So I'll admit, it's a little something that I've kind of had bottled up where I'm a little pissed off. I'm like, hold on, why is my fandom invalid, but yours is valid? So all I wanted was, and because, God, you used to hear it all the time, Titanic is better than Star Wars, and it's like, are you kidding me? You're never going to get a sequel to Titanic. How could that objectively be better? Art is subjective. Yeah, no. No, there's things that are actually genuinely better, as in there's metrics where you can say, no, it's performed better. I mean, and come on, honestly, who today is still talking about the Titanic movie? Hell, who's talking about Avatar? That's the other one that took the cake. Nobody's talking about this shit anymore. Who's talking about Star Wars? People are always talking about Star Wars. It never stops. So which one's better, huh? Not that popularity is a gauge of something being, superior, but just what stands the test of time. I think that's maybe the ultimate gauge of something's viability and importance. And Avatar, I mean, maybe eventually James Cameron will get to doing those Avatar sequels that he said he had a whole trilogy before. I don't know why he's never gotten around to it. He's had plenty of time. But anyway, now, granted, people will instantly want to bring up, well, okay, Star Wars Force Awakens is doing tons of money, but what about inflation? Didn't when Titanic came out, weren't tickets only $4 or $5 and now they're $10, $20, whatever the case may be? Yeah, okay, that's a fair argument to bring up, and we're going to get into the movie. I'm going to start spoiling it here in a minute. I just want to get this out of the way. Let's talk about the success here. There's truth to what you're saying, but then by that metric, Titanic isn't the biggest movie either. As soon as you start questioning inflation, none of the movies that you think of are big shit are big shit. Avatar didn't do well by comparison. Any of the Star Wars movies haven't done well by comparison. And by comparison too, I think Gone with the Wind, which at the time it was about 20 cents a ticket, a movie ticket back then. We're talking, 60, 70 years ago. Okay. At 20 cents a ticket, adjust for inflation, Gone with the Wind blew away everything and still has. It's still the biggest movie of all time. Take that for what you want. If you want to go in the inflation thing, even like Avatar, the reason Avatar beat Titanic was because at the time there weren't like a whole lot of 3D theaters and all this stuff, and you had to pay like $5 extra to see a 3D movie. And most people, the whole point of Avatar was to see it in 3D because it was made for 3D. In fact, it was the only movie, in my opinion, that you ever needed to actually see in 3D. Otherwise, 3D is just a gimmick. That movie was designed for it. Very, very unique case. Okay, but it made more money because they were charging absolutely, unquestionably more per ticket. So, we want to get into fairness, whatever. But bottom line is that, by the common metrics that run, I think The Force Awakens is going to do $1 billion easy. Like with absolute ease, it's going to do $1 billion. And it's going to be the biggest movie of all time. Episode 8 might not be. Rogue Squadron, that's the other movie coming out this year. That might not be the big shit. But episode 7 I think is going to end up taking the cake. And that's fine. That's how it worked before in the 70s. Episode 4 was the number one grossing movie up until E.T. And episode 5 and episode 6, Empire and Return of the Jedi, they never matched the numbers that A New Hope did. But that's fine. It doesn't matter. And the bottom line is that I would love to see the top 10 grossing films of all time by the common metric, not adjusting for inflation or whatever. I would love to see those movies just own the whole thing. Have episodes 1 through 9 all be in the top 10, though some would say episode 1 will never get there. And then have number 10 could be E.T., because E.T. is technically a Star Wars movie. Because in episode 1, you see the E.T.s. So that's a Star Wars flick. And boy, if you ever want to read a great book, there is a sequel book. It was based upon a story by Steven Spielberg. The Book of the Green Planet, it's called. Hell of a read. It's the sequel to E.T. It's great. But anyway. So what I wanted The Force Awakens to do, what I wanted it to achieve as a movie, it has achieved. It has knocked down Titanic, and it will likely knock down Avatar. Crush them all. Good. Doesn't matter if I like the movie or not. But with that said, I liked it. I thought it was a hell of a film. Just fine and dandy. It wasn't... I don't rank it as far as rankings go. And boy, if I give you the rankings now, you might not listen to everything else I have to say. But as far as rankings, yeah, I'd probably put it at last. Yep. I liked episode 1 better. I'm not kidding. Absolutely. And part of that goes into, and of course, all right, let's talk a little bit about the story of The Force Awakens. And I have a ton I want to cover here. Like I said, I could have done the whole show on this. Okay. But the storyline is that you have, it's 30 years after Return of the Jedi. The Galactic Empire no longer exists. There's a new rebellion, a new republic, okay, that has come into place, which, is the successor to the old republic. The rebellion no longer exists. Now there's this terrorist group called the Resistance. And largely it is accurate to call them a terrorist group within the universe, because when you read the novel by Alan Dean Foster of The Force Awakens, he makes it explicitly clear that the New Republic, even though it says the New Republic supports the Resistance, that support is kind of iffy. Really, a lot of the New Republic doesn't like the Resistance either. So you kind of have the situation where, the Resistance could easily be claimed a terrorist group. And you have, in place of the Galactic Empire, you have this new group, which is, supposed to, some people are saying, well, it's meant to represent the Nazis, yada, yada. It's the First Order. They are the successors to the Galactic Empire. Now, the First Order, and this is something else that you only get if you read the book, is a completely legitimate and recognized political system. Yes, so was the Nazi Party in the 1930s in Germany, right? And the supreme leader Snoke, who we're going to talk about in a minute, he is recognized as a shrewd politician and all this stuff. This is one of the things with the movie, is that it's very fast paced, and it's a little light on the details. And so I found reading the book to be very helpful, reading the novelization by Alan Dean Foster. which is one of the rare times where I felt like, in fact, I can't think of any other time where I felt I needed to read the movie novelization to actually understand what's happening in the movie. But anyway, this is the political landscape that you have 30 years after Return of the Jedi. And it has to do with a stormtrooper, that being the character of Finn. He is the black character played by John Boyega, who, has a crisis of conscience while he's on the planet Jakku, which looks very much like Tatooine. It's a desert planet, all that. And he wants to, get away from the First Order. He doesn't want to work for them anymore. And so he saves a pilot that gets so the opening crawl talks about how they're trying to find Luke Skywalker. Luke Skywalker's disappeared, and they're trying to find him. And this one guy, Lor Santeca, he's played by Max von Sydow. He has the map to be able to find, or at least a part of the map to be able to find Luke Skywalker. And so this Resistance pilot, supposedly the best pilot in the Resistance, named Poe Dameron, he is going to Jakku to get this piece of map, him and his droid BB-8, which everybody loves BB-8. And he gets captured by Kylo Ren, and then Finn, they go back to Starshire. Finn breaks him out. Finn breaks Poe Dameron out, and then Finn meets this character on Jakku that is Rey. Rey is this apparently latent Force user. You run into, they end up stealing the Millennium Falcon. The Millennium Falcon sends out a distress signal, and Han Solo and Chewbacca pick it up, and so that's how Han Solo and Chewbacca end up back in, and they get back on the Millennium Falcon. Then they all end up going to this place that's kind of like the cantina scene in The New Hope, like kind of like Mos Eisley there, the Mos Eisley Cantina. But this is run by a woman named Maz Kanata on a planet. The planet name begins with a T. I don't remember it exactly. And then, she ends up, Maz Kanata's been alive for 1,000 years, which means she's older than Yoda. She's handed over the lightsaber to Rey. She gives the lightsaber being and this is really wacky, this is the lightsaber that Luke dropped in Empire Strikes Back. This is Luke's original lightsaber, which of course was originally his father's, Anakin Skywalker / Darth Vader's lightsaber. And she has a flashback sequence and yada, yada, yada. And she decides, no, I don't need to be going back to Jakku, because she wanted to stay on Jakku, so that she's waiting for her family to come back. She's kind of fun, yada, yada. And then a battle ensues between the First Order and the Resistance. And then the First Order, with this new weapon, the Starkiller base, they end up blowing up They end up blowing up the New Republic's like home system, which is the Hosnian system. They make it look like Coruscant, this Hosnian prime planet, but it's actually just like, this is the seed of the New Republic, and they destroy it instantly with this, super Death Star, which is actually, the Starkiller base is this giant ice planet that they've turned into a super weapon, literally. Take that for what you want. And then, of course, Rey and a biggest spoiler here, Han Solo dies because Kylo Ren is his son. Kylo Ren is kind of this Darth Vader character. Rey, Finn, Kylo Ren, there's this big battle, blah, blah, blah. Trench run scene, and then Poe Dameron blows up Starkiller base, and everybody goes home. Everybody's happy. Rey goes off, and she wants to find Luke Skywalker, because apparently this lightsaber is kind of calling her to do that. And she goes out to find Luke Skywalker. And at the end of the movie, she's flying in the Falcon with BB-8 or with R2-D2 and Chewbacca. And they land on this planet, way out somewhere. And they find Luke Skywalker. Luke Skywalker never says a thing. Rey tries to hand over the lightsaber, and the movie ends. So there you go. There's the whole plot for the film. Okay. Now that you understand all that, let's get into breaking it down, shall we? So this movie, one of the points that Stephanie brought up that I thought was really, really kind of solid last week is that Star Wars is a mess. And it is the whole story is a mess. There's a ton of inconsistencies. Yes, you can say there's inconsistencies in every universe. I would argue against that, because I think Babylon 5 is one of those, maybe that's why it's the greatest show ever made, because Babylon 5 doesn't really have any inconsistencies. Not really. Not at these levels anyway. I mean, for fuck's sake. And Star Wars has been riddled with inconsistencies. Like, it doesn't make, like, it's down. I'm always shocked that nobody has like there's never been riotous groups. There's been riotous groups over Jar Jar Binks and, him being racist and all this, but there's never been groups about the blatant incest, that's on display in the Star Wars trilogy. It's like, Luke and Leia make out, and it's, and it gets worse than that. And this leads me into some of these points I've brought up on Sovereign Tech during the climax, where I can talk about anything, I can geek out. Some of these points I've brought up before, but we have a real inconsistency here, because the story that I just described for you for The Force Awakens is not the story that George Lucas wanted to tell. But I don't know what to believe from George Lucas. Okay, let me lay that out, because he said, so I've seen there's a book you want to get your hands on. It's called Splinter of the Mind's Eye. It's written by Alan Dean Foster, who also originally wrote A New Hope, the novelization for A New Hope, which is a very different book from the movie. And he also wrote the novelization for The Force Awakens, which I recommend reading, because in some ways the book is slightly better than the movie, in some ways. Again, the movie was great. I'm not saying The Force Awakens was bad. I am comparing it. The only way you can compare The Force Awakens is by comparing it to other Star Wars films, because Star Wars films are in a completely different class from every other film. Okay, so understand what I'm saying is that I'm basing it around, comparing it to Star Wars and really not anything else, to the rest of the Star Wars saga. But George Lucas, so in Splinter of the Mind's Eye, he writes the introduction, and this book was published in 1979. It came out before The Empire Strikes Back. In this book, I think they're going after the Kyber crystal. Okay, and Darth Vader's looking for it too. It's kind of this Force relic, which there's an important point that I want to bring up about relics. You're gonna see what I'm saying here. There's this Force relic, the Kyber crystal, whatever. It has this tremendous power, yada yada. And so the rebellion wants to find it before the Empire does. And so Leia and Luke individually go after it. Okay, like those two, they go on a secret mission to go find the Kyber crystal, if I'm getting the name right. There's a point where they are frolicking and rolling around in the mud. And I mean, and Alan Dean Foster is clearly, again, George Lucas was very protective of his baby at this time, his baby being Star Wars. He's called it that. Okay. And he would not let anything in there that shouldn't be in there. And I mean, in Splinter of the Mind's Eye, it just gets short of being a sex scene. In this, between someone who apparently has always been planned to be brother and sister. This is the problem, is that supposedly George Lucas had this big drawn out plan. Now, in the introduction that he wrote for Splinter of the Mind's Eye, he said that he had 9 movies planned. Here's the problem with that. If you watch there was the last edition of the originals, okay, before the special editions came out, there was released on VHS. He did interviews in the beginning of each film. You had 3 VHS tapes, A New Hope, Empire Strikes Back, and Return of the Jedi. In the beginning of each one, he does an interview with Leonard Maltin. It's a 3-part interview. And in the 3rd part, in the beginning of Return of the Jedi, I'm sure you can find these on YouTube, he specifically says that all he ever had was 6 movies. He had 6 stories to tell. He had a prequel trilogy and the original trilogy. And at the time, I mean, that makes sense for him to say, of course, because he was in the middle of producing, of making the prequel trilogy. So that directly contradicts what everybody else, what he has said other times. There's times where he said there was 9, and there's times where he said there was 6. And then you have the problem of, it does not appear, there is absolutely no evidence that before Return of the Jedi, before 1983, or whenever Return of the Jedi started production, that Leia was Luke's sister. There's no evidence for that whatsoever. And in fact, it creates massive contradictions, because how did Leia stand 6 inches from her father in A New Hope, in the very beginning of A New Hope, in the very beginning of the first Star Wars movie, and he didn't sense that she was strong in the Force? He didn't sense that that was his daughter? Are you kidding? No, it doesn't make any sense. And so there was no plan here. There's absolutely, I don't think there was any plan. And this lends me to believe, now, we're going to get in more into The Force Awakens, but I want to lay some of this out. This lends me to believe that George Lucas might not have actually created Star Wars, and that he might not even be the original writer. The original writer, I think, was Alan Dean Foster himself, because Star Wars kind of matches Alan Dean Foster's sort of quick space operatic style, as to where anything else you watch by George Lucas, or, anything else he's come up with, whatever, none of it matches what he did in Star Wars. Yes, the production values kind of match. Of course, he has a very specific style as far as production goes. But as far as story-wise and all this stuff, it doesn't hold up. And so I wonder if someone else, maybe I'm wrong about Alan Dean Foster, but I wonder if all of it was just somebody else's, idea. And maybe the prequel trilogy was changed to where, George Lucas altered things, because obviously things were altered, to some degree, at least at Return of the Jedi. And this is true because originally, of course, the Ewoks were supposed to be Wookiees and all this stuff. And so all this lends credence to the idea that Star Wars is a mess of a story. Like, things are just constantly changing. And this fact still held true with the Force Awakens, because we find out, according to various stories, that up until like almost release day, and this was true for A New Hope as well, I know, but up until almost release day, they were doing new cuts of the film. And there's lots of scenes that we saw in the trailers that no longer, or that never made it into the final film. In fact, one of them being Maz Kanata, that little Yoda-like character, okay, that isn't a Jedi, but knows the Force, whatever. She hands over her Luke's original lightsaber, to Princess Leia in the trailer. It's a very prominent scene that got everybody excited. That scene never happens. And J.J. Abrams has had to come out posthumously, or, he's had to come out after the film came out, and he's had to explain a lot about The Force Awakens. Now, this is one of the areas where The Force Awakens really fails, is that he's had to come out and explain away a lot of the stuff that was either not in the film or that was in the film. There's the issue of the map, which is the start of the whole story. The map, the chunk of map that Poe Dameron is trying to get from Lor San Tekka. And like, there's the thing that suddenly, R2-D2, when they go to find R2-D2, BB-8 wonders if R2-D2 has the rest of the map, because all they have is a chunk. And it turns out that R2-D2 does have it, kind of out of nowhere. It's like, it's what do they call that? Not a mulligan, or maybe that is a mulligan, or a MacGuffin. Just where it like, oh, perfectly, you're right on time, but you never expected it to come out anywhere. It's a bad form of storytelling. Maybe I think that's a MacGuffin. A mulligan is when you get a get out of jail free card. And so R2-D2 comes in with the MacGuffin, and he ends up having the rest of the map. And we can go find Luke Skywalker. Now there's a problem with that, because, and J.J. Abrams knew that it was kind of weird, and he had to come out and explain that whole scene. And the book doesn't do a good job of explaining it either. And there was opportunities to explain, to explain this, because, he said that R2-D2 had downloaded the Imperial database way back when he connected to the Death Star, back in A New Hope. But you don't know that. You know that R2-D2 connected at some point, but you have no idea that he downloaded the entire Imperial network and an entire map of the galaxy. And like, he never shared that map of the galaxy with the rebellion to help them find some place to go. I mean, there's a lot of problems. There's a lot of plot holes. There's a lot of issues with The Force Awakens. This is not a perfect movie, by any stretch. So, I'm kind of all over the place here. And I have so much I want to say, on the matter, but I just want to make it clear that while it was a great film and it was a fine Star Wars film, it is not perfect. And I don't consider it to be, the greatest, one yet. Some people are saying that it's the second best or perhaps the third best of the bunch. I think that's giving way more credit than it's due. This has, just major issues. And I'm not saying, I love the prequels, and I know I'm rare in that. I enjoy episode 1. I'm not saying that those movies weren't without problems. I'm just saying that those movies' problems, either A, don't compare to the ones in The Force Awakens, or B, people seem to be giving a pass to the inconsistencies in The Force Awakens, yet they wouldn't give that pass to episode 1. And that annoys the hell out of me. I think you can understand why, based on what I was talking about earlier. I want consistency in people's thought. So anyway, yeah, those are a couple of the issues. Other issues with the film were that The score, John Williams, look, I know John Williams is 83 years old. I get it. Okay. I don't expect him to pull out some grand opus. But that's the thing is it wasn't even an opus, let alone grand. It was an incredibly minimalist score that was delivered here. I know I've recently, you know, after listening over it a few times, like I know Rey's theme. Rey is the female lead character here, who, by the way, you know, let me say this. As far as the acting goes, all the acting was phenomenal. The acting was just top notch. It was great. And everybody they cast was perfect. Daisy Ridley as Rey was great. John Boyega as Finn was great. The guy that played Poe Dameron was great. Everybody's great. And of course, the original characters are great. No question there. But the music, now Rey has a specific theme that's kind of the main theme of the whole movie. And it's true that it is the main theme because it continually gets intertwined, into the film, into the film score. But the score is really minimalist. There's a track, The March of the Resistance, not very inspiring. You know, it doesn't get the blood flowing as to where most Star Wars soundtracks really get the blood flowing. I mean, and this is one area where I think a lot of people, I hope they agree that the soundtracks for the prequels, whether you like the movies or not, the soundtracks are fucking brilliant. They're amazing. And this was kind of the opposite case, I think, for a lot of people, or at least I hope, because I mean, the soundtrack was not that good. And you know, it's interesting too, because especially with episode one had maybe 3 or 4 new themes that came out of it. You had Anakin's theme that came out of it. You had the Trade Federation theme. You had the Duel of Fates, which was a huge hit. I mean, there was tons of like really new hummable music that came out of it. You know, stuff that you would be humming when you walked out of the theater or when you're just thinking about Star Trek, or I mean, thinking about Star Wars. There's an unforgivable statement on my part. And this really has none of that whatsoever. Now, a movie doesn't have to have that, but again, I'm not comparing this to other movies. I'm comparing it to other Star Wars films, and every other Star Wars film has had a phenomenal soundtrack. In fact, even, you know, Shadows of the Empire, which was that major book media tie-in event that happened back in the late 90s. That took place between, I love it. I really wish it was still canon. That took place between The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. Joel McNeely actually did a score for the book. He did a full-on score, and it was used in the video game as well. And that score was stirring. It was very good. And yeah, I'm just saying this doesn't hold up. I've heard video game soundtracks for Star Wars that have new themes in them at that were far better than the soundtrack for The Force Awakens. It was probably the weakest part of the whole movie. Was the soundtrack. And yeah, I mean, there were some familiar cues. There was some music that was used here and there. You'd hear the Imperial March theme a little bit, you know, when they show off Darth Vader's helmet, or when Han and Leia get back together, which Kylo Ren is Han and Leia's kid, by the way. I don't know if I mentioned that earlier. They play a little bit of of Princess Leia's theme during that, which has been transmorphed into like Luke and Leia's theme when you get into the Return of the Jedi soundtrack and all that. But yeah, just the soundtrack really, really weak. But, you know, one of the interesting things, and like I said, the production values were great. I do want to talk about the direction and the cinematography at some point, but in the interest of, you know, of smoothing along here, one of the interesting things that the soundtrack does, it does 2 things. It lends credence to 2 possible theories, because one of the things with episode 7 is that episode 8 is probably going to allow everything that happened in episode 7 to make a whole lot more sense. In fact, it needs to. Otherwise, episode 7 is going to get looked on even less favorably over time. Even though right now it's 95% on Rotten Tomatoes. It's amazing that a Star Wars movie has that. But there's a point where you have the Supreme Leader Snoke, he's the head of the First Order. All you ever see him as is a hologram. He's being played by Andy, I can't think of his name now, but it's the same guy that played the Gollum and all that. He does a great job. I want to say Andy Serkis, but I think that's somebody else. Anyway, he's playing Snoke. I think the name sucks, you know, the name Snoke, but then again, I think it's just a name for his alternative character. It's like it's hiding what his Darth name is, because he doesn't like expressly say that he's a Sith Lord, but he's definitely a guy who's, you know, running the show as far as the dark side of the Force goes, you know, at this point in time in the Star Wars universe. Now, there's when you first see Snoke, you see his hologram and General Hux and Kylo Ren, the two big heads, the two big heavies in the First Order are talking to him. The music that plays is incredibly reminiscent of the music that gets played in Episode 3, like right down to the same notes, everything, whatever instruments they use to play this. I think they're the exact same thing. And they don't sound exactly the same, but they're so close, because in Episode 3, there's a great point in Episode 3 where Anakin and well, he's not Emperor yet, but Chancellor Palpatine are sitting down in an opera house on Coruscant. And Palpatine starts telling Anakin about Darth Plagueis, who, eventually find out Darth Plagueis was Palpatine's master, okay, in the dark side, because Palpatine is Darth Sidious, yada, yada. The music being played when he's talking about Darth Plagueis is the same that gets played every time you see Supreme Leader Snoke. So this leads us to our first little, one of the first little theories I'm going to lay out here as far as what's going on in The Force Awakens. And that is that Snoke is Darth Plagueis. And it's interesting because Darth Plagueis has like this huge gash in his head. Even though he's a hologram, you see this huge gash and it looks like his jaw was removed or something. And Darth Plagueis, when you hear about him in Episode 3, it said that he could create life. Like he could bring people back from the dead. And of course, that's why Anakin was so, hot on the idea of Darth Plagueis, because he kept having this dream that Padme was going to die. And so he could bring Padme back if he only knew Darth Plagueis' powers, which is interesting when you get into the idea that Kylo Ren in The Force Awakens is saying, Father, I'm going to finish what you started. Or, he's saying grandfather. He's talking to Darth Vader's mask, who is his grandfather, saying, I'll finish what you started. And it makes you kind of wonder what that's about. Maybe that's Kylo Ren saying, I'm going to figure out how to bring the dead back to life. But I do think that Snoke, I'd be willing to put money on it, that Snoke is Darth Plagueis. Because you also find out that Darth Plagueis, the way he talks, especially in the book, you find out more that he's been around for a while. Like, people know who he is. And he seems to have knowledge of times before the rebellion, before there was a Galactic Empire. And so maybe he is Darth Plagueis kind of reborn, and his body is still reforming after Darth Sidious or Emperor Palpatine had killed him so many decades before. Now, the interesting thing with that is that, and this kind of leads to a funny little bit of story here. Of course, Han Solo dies in this. It's kind of the big pivotal moment of the movie for so many people. And he's killed by his own son, which is Kylo Ren, or Ben Solo, or Ben Organa. I don't know what name he chose, but Han Solo calls him Ben at one point. And Ben Solo, or Kylo Ren, kills him. And then he falls into this pit on Starkiller Base, and Starkiller Base blows up. So you would think there's no way that Han Solo is going to come back. In fact, there's a funny joke going around on some other Star Wars podcasts where they've said that it's like, all right, Han Solo just really, because Harrison Ford, the actor who plays Han Solo, wanted to get out of Return of the Jedi. He didn't want to be a part of that anymore. He wanted to get killed off in Return of the Jedi. He didn't want to be part of Star Wars anymore. And so some people think that him getting killed in The Force Awakens was a contractual obligation, because it'd be big money to have Han Solo for the next two films. No question. Okay. So some people think, all right, they killed him off just to end his contract, because this is what he's always wanted. He wanted the Han Solo character killed, and it made for a very dramatic moment, and it did. But the contradiction to that is that Kathleen Kennedy, I believe it was, who's the head of Lucasfilm for Disney, because Disney now owns Lucasfilm, right? She has said that every major actor and certainly Harrison Ford would be one of those, that you saw in The Force Awakens will be in Episode 8. One would assume that means Han Solo is going to be in Episode 8, and Han Solo is not strong in the Force, so I don't think you're going to find out that somehow he's a Force ghost. So how's this going to work? How is Han Solo going to be? Is it just going to be like, flashbacks? What's the deal? Or is Darth Plagueis going to be able to perhaps somehow manipulate or control various people by offering them the ability, or that being Supreme Leader Snoke, if he is Darth Plagueis, by being able to bring Han Solo back? I've never heard anybody else say this. Not on any Star Wars podcast I've listened to. No one's brought up that theory. But if Harrison Ford is supposed to come back, I think this is the only way that it can happen. And it fits in with, with the whole mythology. It's an interesting prospect to bring up. So anyway, that's how I the whole Darth Plagueis thing. I mean, I think that's a foregone conclusion. The other thing that the music brings up, while we're still talking about the music, is that Rey's theme very cleverly gets mixed in with Luke Skywalker's theme, which is kind of more or less the whole Star Wars theme, or like the throne room theme. And so a lot of people are saying that Rey is actually Luke Skywalker's daughter, perhaps, or some kind of relation to Luke Skywalker. And I mean, there's a bunch of different theories, but I think the theory I'd run with, because John Williams has also said is that Rey's theme is based off of Luke Skywalker's theme, is that she is his daughter. And because Rey was one of the characters that I had a hard problem with, and I'll talk about this a little bit, is that suddenly out of nowhere, she's just really good with the Force. Like, seemingly, once she gets captured by Kylo Ren, and Kylo Ren starts reading her mind and all that, trying to get the map to find Luke Skywalker, because that's the whole point of the story, is everybody needs to go find Luke Skywalker, either to kill him or save him. That she just suddenly, she's really good with the lightsaber. Suddenly she can actually, do the Jedi mind trick on a stormtrooper, which, by the way, that stormtrooper was played by Daniel Craig, that being James Bond. He did a great job. It was a funny moment. And that was another good thing about this movie. It was very funny. They did a good job with the humor. And so she could just suddenly do that. And then, she gets in this battle with Kylo Ren, who either A, was trained by Luke Skywalker himself, or B, has just had a ton of experience with, Supreme Leader Snoke and all that, and is thus very good with the lightsaber and has shown incredible Force powers. The fact that Rey could rather evenly match Kylo Ren was a bit of a problem for a lot of people. Now, part of this I can kind of dispel, and another part is the theory. The reason that Rey was so capable of doing what she was doing, I think, came from the fact that, well, okay, so the whole lightsaber thing, this is something that holds over from the old EU. I have a ton to say on that. This is something that holds over from the old EU. The idea that only Jedis could handle a lightsaber, because there was a story where, I don't think it was in Dark Empire, maybe it was, where it was surprising that Boba Fett had of course, this took place after Return of the Jedi, that Boba Fett had a lightsaber and that he was actually really good with it. And it was shocking that he was really good with it, because the idea was, I think what Luke Skywalker says in his mind is that usually only a Jedi can handle a lightsaber, because you got to be able to guess where the next thing's going to happen. Okay. Which is part of, kind of what gets talked about in episode 1, with the ability to see things before they happen. But that whole idea of that only a Jedi is good with the lightsaber is totally out of the EU, which got tanked, which got thrown away by Disney. So there's no reason that other normal people can't be good with the lightsaber. In fact, if you read the Star Wars comic books, the ones done by Marvel now, not the ones by Dark Horse, but the ones that are part of the new canon that Disney is creating, there is a point where Han Solo has a lightsaber. I mean, like, where everybody ends up using a lightsaber at one point because they're escaping from this Hutt's palace, and they're all pretty good with them. And even Finn is pretty good with the lightsaber in The Force Awakens. So the idea that to be able to be really good with a lightsaber requires you to be powerful with the Force, that is an EU creation, and that is something that is no longer true in Star Wars, in my opinion. Anyway, so there's that. And so you get this, Rey gets set up as this character that's really good with, like, her staff. She has that staff that she uses, and she can defend herself. So the fact that she can fight Kylo Ren with a lightsaber, at first I was like, wait a minute, this is ridiculous. But then I had to check myself and realize that I was basing that upon old canonical information that isn't canonical anymore. So there's no real issue there. The idea that she somehow was able to do a Jedi mind trick, I have to explain that away with a theory, and maybe even this can explain how she was so good with the lightsaber and all that. And that is that when there was an exchange of thought between Kylo and Rey were actually reading each other's minds at that point, and Rey may have integrated some of Kylo's abilities, like the Jedi mind trick and other things, and figured out that she could, oh, wait a minute, I'm capable of this, and she realized that she was strong in the Force. So there might have been an exchange of a telepathic exchange of information there. And that's how, she ends up being so good at what she does. The other things with Rey are that, how is she such a good pilot if she's been on Jakku her whole life? You find out there's a book called Before the Awakening. You find out in that she, she found in the wreckage of Jakku, because Jakku is like this graveyard for a huge battle that must have went down between the New Republic and the Empire, or the Rebellion and the Empire. And she found a battle, like a battle simulator there, a flight simulator of sorts, and that she ended up playing with that as a kid, as often as she could. And that's why she became such a great pilot. But this lends me, I want to get into this, and wow, I'm running in on like the 10-minute mark. I'm not going to be able to get in everything I wanted to talk about. But this gets into the idea. I told you I could talk for 2 hours, that other than like perhaps that moment I described to you about, everybody using lightsabers, and discounting all of the books, because that Before the Awakening book that I described, the novelization by Alan Dean Foster, and some of the other works like the Visual Dictionary and the Incredible Cross Sections and all of that didn't come out until the same day that The Force Awakens came out in theaters. All of the canon before that, and I know the guy that played Poe Dameron likes to talk about how, I was born on Yavin and that was filmed in Guatemala and I'm from Guatemala. Isn't that cool? Yeah, that's great. Okay, but there's really been no reason as yet that I can see why they bothered, rebooting the canon. Because none of it, other than the couple things I described, none of it has had any gauge, any value in The Force Awakens. Like, none of it meant anything. There's nothing there's some good books. Like there was the one, The Lost Stars. That was a great read that kind of talked about like the mentality behind what was done in the original trilogy and all of this. But none of it really mattered for The Force Awakens. And in fact, based, like I said, with the trailers, like everything you thought about the movie that was going to be so ended up not being so. Like in the movie in the trailers, you got the idea that Finn was actually the Jedi. No, it ended up being Rey. There's why they're not inconsistencies, but the way it was all laid out is completely different from how the movie ended up playing out. I have seen no good reason to dump the original canon and to go ahead and create a new one. There's no point. And I don't think Lawrence Kasdan or anybody is going to go to these other materials, because there's already been a few books. There's already been, plenty of comics and all this stuff. I don't see any reason why they would go to that. But I thought it was dumb. I think it's fucking retarded that they somehow made everything else null and void. They should have just said, yeah, we're not going to pay any attention to that. And the movies are still the only thing that matters, because everything else hasn't really had any bearing. In my opinion, it hasn't really had a point. And maybe that's why they're still publishing a lot of those, a lot of the older EU books and comics and, just calling it the Legends series, because frankly, there's no reason not to, because the canon, the canonical, tie-in work, comics and books and all that have as much bearing, I think, on the movies and even on Rebels, on the Rebels TV show, as the, all the things that are now considered legends do. They're kind of just as meaningless. So I haven't seen a real point, to any of that. And in fact, even with the stuff that was supposed to be like really tied in, like the Shattered Empire, that was the 4-part comic series that was supposed to, really bring, Return of the Jedi and The Force Awakens together. And it really didn't do that. Yeah, you found out how Poe Dameron was born, and you get some more Luke Skywalker action. You see what happens right after Return of the Jedi. But largely, it didn't have anything, to say about The Force Awakens. And I think that's why a lot of people were scooping up, reading about, reading all these stories and everything and all these novels and comics, was because they were wanting to get hints as to what happens in The Force Awakens. And folks, I can tell you, by and large, none of it had any bearing on The Force Awakens itself. Now, the stuff that came out on the 18th, that came out on the same day as The Force Awakens, yeah, okay, that held some, some importance to what's going on. But, that's the other thing too. I don't understand why Disney was, and by the way, magic of editing, this show's going to go into overtime. I added on some stuff, but I don't know why Disney was so goddamn secretive. The only thing I could figure they wanted to keep quiet was that Han Solo was going to die. Otherwise, I don't see the fucking, There was nothing in it that was just like, oh my God, I can't believe that happened, you know? Like, I mean, there was no purpose in being that secretive. And so there was no point in not releasing a lot of this content that came out on the 18th beforehand. Yeah, I understand why he didn't release the novelization or whatever. But even then, like, the novelization for the other Star Wars movies came out ahead of time, sometimes a month ahead of time of the movie. And, you know, that didn't hurt sales at all, I don't think. And most people were, I don't know, like it was still you still have to see the movie because the movie sometimes is often different from the book. And I just don't think most people cared. I don't think most people would have cared. I mean, again, all of that had to do with the fact that Han Solo was going to die. That's the only thing that makes any sense. Anyway, so we've covered Rey, the theory behind Rey, theories behind Rey, covered Darth Plagueis. Let's see what else I've got here to kind of talk about. So let's get into a question here quick before I get into the rest of it. And I do want to talk about what I thought were some of my favorite things in the movie. I'll get into that. One of the questions was what esoteric stuff did you feel was in The Force Awakens? So this is where I'm going to, put on my tinfoil hat, because I've talked about this before, is that there's a lot of stuff in Star Wars that is esoteric, that is very strange as to why it's in there, because a lot of it is kind of rare as far as within its thought. The most common example is, and you can go to Google Images or whatever, and you can type in Yoda Freemasonry. And you're going to end up with something very strange, but that is also very real. Very real is in the sense that there is a character known as Yoda in Freemasonic lore that looks like Yoda, and that is this, teacher of wisdom and all this stuff. Okay, but most people have no idea that character ever existed. Even today, even people that have heavily studied Freemasonry. And that's why I say my tinfoil hat is on right now. I'll take it off in a bit. So as far as any kind of esoteric or occultish, not cultish, but occult type stuff in it, there was certainly the one that stands out right away is the advertising campaign, the poster campaign that started a few weeks before the movie actually came out. And that is where everybody had a lightsaber over their face and it covered one eye. And all you had was one eye, which is, by some people's theory, that's the Eye of Horus, and that this is very commonplace in the entertainment industry, where people will cover one eye in various clever ways, and it's all to, say, oh yeah, to say they're all Satanists or something like that, which, I'm an atheist, I don't buy into that. I'm just aware of it. Okay. So there was that. And then of course, everybody was changing their profile picture, to cover one eye. So it would seem that kind of got out there. So that's sort of the first thing as far as, occult works go, that were involved in The Force Awakens. The other thing, actually, this is the interesting point. So there's a couple things. Ever since Disney bought it, I have noticed a lot more injection, not necessarily in The Force Awakens, but around it. Like with the last season of the Clone Wars, some of the stuff in Star Wars Rebels, and even some of the stuff in the comic books and in the books has been, I think, almost explicitly occult, almost explicitly, quote unquote, satanic. Again, I'm an atheist, folks. Relax. The best example, or the first thing I really noticed that was tied into The Force Awakens was in the comic series I mentioned, Shattered Empire. There's a point Luke is looking for these two trees, and apparently one of these trees, you see it in the Clone Wars, was a tree that was part of a tree that was planted at the Jedi Temple. Okay. Now this tree, what does that one tree represent? Is it the tree of life from, a lot of occult works? Maybe, maybe that's what that's referencing. The two trees, the fact that there were two of them is very interesting. And when he grabs the two trees, that kind of reminds me of, there's this one, it's called the Animal God. Okay. Which is, this is in real life, not in Star Wars. Okay. The Animal God is the symbol that appears around the world, where it's this person generally, usually, male or female, doesn't matter. There's this person holding two sticks. Okay, and it shows up like in Peru. It shows up in sites there. It shows up in even in Zoroastrianism. There's all these different areas where this thing shows up, where it's just like this creature almost holding two sticks. So I could go with that. The two trees was kind of a weird thing. You know, I felt like it kind of represented that animal god. In fact, some people have claimed that the symbol on Starbucks cups, originally it was a mermaid, but now it has turned into where it is that animal god holding the two sticks. What that animal god represents and all that is a whole other story. Okay, but that the symbology is there. The other weird things that are happening in like it. I mean, just the whole idea of Force ghosts, the whole idea of talking to the dead is like the most common occultish, notion in general. In fact, even Darth Plagueis, the idea of Darth Plagueis of bringing life from the dead, that's like the idea of the golem, like kind of the Frankenstein's monster, the idea that we can bring, the dead back to life. All of that falls under a very occult banner. And I'm going to get into more serious Star Wars stuff, folks. Don't worry. But, so that whole notion, is really there. And in fact, you get into like suddenly, one of the interesting things, and I was disappointed wasn't in The Force Awakens, was midichlorians that was introduced in the prequel trilogy. I thought this was great. I thought it was a great idea because it eliminated the spirituality from the Force. It turned the Force into a scientific principle because you could gauge it based upon a person's midichlorian count, which, by the way, the whole thing with Rey, the whole confusion with Rey, if all they did was, gave a midichlorian count on Rey and said, holy shit, her midichlorians are off the scale, that would have explained everything. Nobody would have questioned, her abilities because they'd just be like, well, she's incredibly powerful as far as midichlorians. Okay, that makes sense. It would have been a very easy way to do that. And so I think it's bullshit that J.J. Abrams doesn't want midichlorians involved. But this has been a trend, not by J.J. Abrams. Removing midichlorians from the equation has been a trend from Disney ever since they bought out the franchise. Because in season 6 of the Clone Wars, suddenly, like, Qui-Gon Jinn is talking to Obi-Wan about it, and he starts saying that the Force, like, he starts bringing up dualism. That there's good and evil and all, there's this dark and the light and all that. And I'm going to talk about more about that in a minute. Okay. But that whole notion, again, very occultish, that gets brought up. Now the part, and so they're, and the occultish meaning that they're getting it more towards like the spirituality realm. They are taking it away from the scientific realm that George Lucas tried to bring it into, which I applaud him for. It's a pity that the midichlorian idea isn't going to get talked about much anymore. It's a part of the official canon now. Can't take it away unless somebody does some kind of ugly cut of the prequels, which many already have. But anyway, you have that. Now, the other occultish thing that's been going on in Star Wars recently, and this one might be the most blatant, is in Star Wars Rebels. Now, there's a few in Star Wars Rebels, but the biggest one is Star Wars Rebels largely takes place on Lothal. If you don't know what Star Wars Rebels is about, I'm not going to go into it here. I already spent way too much time explaining what The Force Awakens is about, and maybe I shouldn't have. But they're on this planet Lothal, this group of rebels, and you have the little character Ezra Bridger, of course, not even to mention that the main character's name is Cain, and it's all these biblical names. But anyway, Ezra Bridger, now he's starting to have like these visions, and he's trying to find he's trying to find his parents, and more or less he's going on this hero's journey, which is what Star Wars is always all about, is the hero's journey of trying to find himself and what he's meant to do, what his life's meant to, he's looking for meaning. And the creepy part is that now in Star Wars Rebels, in the last few episodes, they've brought up this kind of apparition, this character that Ezra keeps seeing in a dream, which is this white Loth cat. Like it's a cat character that's on Lothal, and it has these giant bunny ears. Okay. And that I think is absolutely representative because most Loth cats aren't white. They're like a purple or a blue. And I think that the white Loth cat is a symbol of the white rabbit. And the white rabbit, if you watch movies like Sucker Punch or, even Alice in Wonderland and all of this, is all about disassociating from reality. And there's people who have like Fritz Springmeier. I'm not saying I agree with these guys, okay, or that I agree with what I'm telling you. I'm just telling you that in people that study occult works and get into the whole conspiracy realm, this is the shit they say. This is the research that they share. Okay. I'm not saying I believe it. Get that clear. But they say that the white rabbit and even the whole idea of Alice in Wonderland and all that is all about creating like disassociative people and is effectively creating mental slaves. So there is, if Alice in Wonderland is an occult work, and many people claim it is, then you are getting, Disney is introducing, they're reintroducing their occult works. And that gets into another topic is, Disney is a very do they schlep around a lot of occult stuff? Absolutely. I've had a lot of people request me to do a special on Disney, on the history of Disney. It is not a good company. And in fact, honestly, in a way, it pains me to give them any kind of money. It really does. But, it's there. So you have the White Rabbit, now introduced in Star Wars, of course, in the shape of the White Loth Cat, or in the visage. There's plenty of occultish, esoteric stuff inside of Star Wars now, and it's really only entered, by and large, since Disney bought it, in my opinion. So that's there. Okay. Another bit of occultish stuff. How about, this one is important. I mentioned earlier that I would talk about it. The idea of relics. Relics are a commonplace thing in Catholicism. The idea that you owning something that belonged to somebody important passes on some kind of spiritual currency, some kind of spiritual quality. And that really is becoming a fact in the Force Awakens, because you have the relics. I mean, and it's an old idea. It's not just a new idea, and I'll say more on that. The idea of, with the relics, like Luke's lightsaber, or Luke/Anakin's blue lightsaber that Rey gets their hands on. Like, suddenly it imbues her with all of this, knowledge, and suddenly, it shows her this vision and everything. So you have this relic. You have Kylo Ren saying directly to Darth Vader's mask, "Please show me again, what you showed me before." Like, he's saying all this stuff. I'm not remembering it exactly, verbatim. But the idea that relics do pass on some kind of information is an incredibly occult idea. It's a part of Catholicism. The idea of having, what's the old Martin Luther, not Martin Luther King, but Martin Luther, his old joke about Catholicism. It's like, and the Cardinal Milan has 5 of the nails that 5 of the 4 nails that put Christ into the cross, because he's making a joke about how relics have nothing to do with Christianity. That's right, because that's a whole other topic, but bottom line is that it's an occult idea. It's a very old one. Now, the interesting point here is that getting reintroduced, because you definitely got that notion, like I said earlier, with Splinter of the Mind's Eye that Alan Dean Foster wrote, is that there are kind of relics that enhance your Force ability, like the Kyber crystal and others. And suddenly Alan Dean Foster is back writing the novel for The Force Awakens, and suddenly this idea comes back. Yeah, it's partly Disney coming back into the fold, no doubt. But I wonder if the master storyman is actually Alan Dean Foster. I'm just kind of going back on that. But the point I'm bringing to you is, yes, Star Wars now, ever since Disney took back over, is now loaded with occultism. More about Alan Dean Foster. This is an interesting thing. Another idea that started getting reintroduced once Disney took over was the character of the Whills, Whills. And this is important. In the original novelization, which was a very strange book for A New Hope that came out in 1976, the novelization, not the movie, that came out in 77. In that, it opens up with this little blurb talking about the time frame that the novel is about to cover, about Princess Leia and all that. And it says, in that blurb in the beginning, it says it's an excerpt from the Journal of the Whills. This Journal of the Whills, yes, supposedly there were these characters called the Whills that were in early transcripts, or, in early versions, storylines that George Lucas had written up. I've never seen those to know that that's true. Okay, but this Journal of the Whills was something that was in the novelization for A New Hope. In season 6, suddenly out of nowhere, decades later of the Clone Wars, in season 6, suddenly Qui-Gon Jinn starts talking about how he learned to conquer death by a shaman of the Whills. He brings up the Whills again. They come out of nowhere. So they're canon now. like the instant Qui-Gon said that in season 6, it's legit. Okay. So Yoda kind of talks about this ancient of the Whills. We need to find out. He must have learned the knowledge from the ancient of the Whills. Who are these Whills? And the interesting thing is that the novelization for The Force Awakens opens up with suddenly another poem by the Whills. And Alan Dean Foster's back, and suddenly the Whills are back, and all this stuff, which is very interesting that this idea got reintroduced. And the poem, if you read it, it's like a poem that they do at the beginning of the novelization for The Force Awakens. And if you read this for the Journal of the Whills, it's all talking about, there's always black, there's always white, talking about light and darkness. He said, but really it all has to come together to gray. Like that's kind of the idea that this lays out. It's a really weird read. And what's interesting is that at the end of The Force Awakens, what is Luke Skywalker wearing? He's wearing gray. He's not wearing the classic Jedi robes. He's not wearing the triple black that he had on in Return of the Jedi that looked awesome. And he's not wearing like dark side black or anything. He's wearing gray. And then you have this Journal of the Whills that's saying that the future of the Force is kind of in the gray. Like that's sort of the point that I kind of got from this little poem from the Journal of the Whills that gets introduced once again. So that, and you got to wonder, and with Star Wars Rebels, you have like the coolest thing going on in Star Wars Rebels, which by the way, Rebels is a great show. Clone Wars is a great show. Rebels is an awesome cartoon or, animated series. It's fantastic. And they reintroduced the character of Ahsoka Tano, who recently, it was just awesome. She pulls out, she carries 2 lightsabers, and they're white. They're like a whitish gray. And and I think people on the production team have already said that means that she's like not on the light side or the dark side. She's in between, which was an old idea within Star Wars lore called potentium. You can look that up and find out more about that. But that's interesting, is so that maybe the overall point getting brought in here is that not that there's evil or good, but there's just the Force. There's no dark side or light side. You got to kind of bring them together. And Snoke seems to be on a similar mission, because he said that to create, the greatest product, he needed something that was born of the light and then bring it into the darkness. And that's why he, seduced Kylo Ren, effectively away from his parents, Han and Leia, and from Luke Skywalker's teachings. So there's this whole notion of going to gray, of existing in the gray, that is a big part of the Force Awakens story. And a lot of that's, kind of theoretical, no doubt. And, sometimes I kind of wonder if Star Wars wasn't always saying this. And in fact, recently the script for The Force Awakens was leaked. And I've downloaded it. I've already kind of skimmed through it. And there's some interesting tidbits in that. Now, granted, it's just the script, and the script can change because, as we said, like they were making cuts, huge cuts in the story with The Force Awakens, right to the last minute. Okay, so anything said in the script might not end up being accurate. But within the script, and you don't necessarily get this in the novelization, but within the script, you find out that when Rey fights Kylo Ren, that there's a point where she realizes she could win and that she could just cut him in half. But she recognizes that she's falling into the line goes something along the lines of like, she realizes that she's in danger of falling from a greater height than the cliff because she's standing by, like there's that the planet was falling apart. And so there's a chasm. And the point is that she could fall into the dark side. And what's fascinating is that she realizes that right after she cuts his face and gives him the scar, the one eye scar, occultism, right in front of, just like Anakin had. Okay. History repeating itself, right? But this is the thing. This is a theory I've talked about many times about Star Wars, is that actually it never teaches that the light side wins. It always teaches that the dark side wins. Or maybe in this case, maybe we're going more towards that gray. Because for her to cut him, for her to actually win, for her to realize she could win, Rey realizes she would have to use the dark side. According to the official script for The Force Awakens, she tapped in briefly into the dark side, and that's how she, ended up cutting Kylo Ren and effectively almost winning. And this is true all the way down the line. Let's start with episode 1. When, Qui-Gon can't beat Darth Maul, but then Obi-Wan gets pissed off when Qui-Gon gets killed, and he gets pissed off and he ends up cutting Darth Maul in half because he's angry. Like he screams, no, all that good stuff. Okay. Let's go into, episode 2. Nobody ends up winning with that one. So let's go to episode 3. Episode 3, Anakin gets pissed off in the beginning, ends up killing Count Dooku. It doesn't win. He doesn't win, albeit due to, I don't know, whatever craziness. Episode 3 is the only one where the good guy actually walks away, winning, because he doesn't go to the dark side. And that's when Obi-Wan cuts off Anakin's arms and legs. But then, you just you keep going down the list. You end up with episode 6, and Luke only beats Vader because he gets mad and he ends up cutting off his hand. So there's this constant message that, look, man, if you want to beat the dark side, you've got to join the dark side. That's what Star Wars says. And maybe they're going to try and explain that away to like, no, well, actually, you want to go into this kind of gray area or something like that, kind of like Plo Koon was, right? Where he could actually use Force lightning, even though he was a Jedi. I don't know, but that point is there. And The Force Awakens, I was a little worried. I was going to do a write-up about this on the Zog blog, that's saying, no, look, The Force Awakens says that not Jedi stoicism doesn't win the day. Sith hedonism does. Okay, that was going to be my write-up. And I was worried that The Force Awakens was going to prove me wrong. But it ends up, it's not. It proves the point, according to the script anyway, that the only way Rey was able to take on Kylo Ren was because she got mad. Let's see, what else we got here? I've really extended the time on this, and I have so much I want to say. One of the interesting things, so why don't I get into the favorites? Let's do the favorites here. No, before I do the favorites, because I want to end off on a good note, I want to talk about the one last thing that I thought that kind of stunk. This movie, honestly, did not feel like Star Wars to me at all. I like George Lucas's, he's a shit director, but I like his cinematography. Okay, and those are kind of two different things. I like the fact that he has grand panning shots and that he throws in things just to throw them in there. I like that. The beauty of Star Wars is that it's such a fleshed out world. The reason Star Wars stuck around with people so long is because it seemed so real. Like it seemed so lived in. It seemed so like there was just so much there. It was so vibrant, as to where most science fiction is not that vibrant. It all takes place within like one little ship and there's nothing on the walls and all that stuff. Star Wars was the antithesis of that. It just looks so legit, and there's always something going on, and it's full of life. This movie was not full of life. It was very narrow. J.J. Abrams is not a good director, in my opinion, and I don't think he saved Star Trek either. I get tired of people saying that he saved Star Trek. Fuck shit, he did. He killed it. I mean, he didn't kill it, but what good things that happen in Star Trek have nothing to do with J.J. Abrams. If anything, it had to do with Orky and Kurtz. But anyway, this movie was really tight, and I didn't think that was a good thing. It was not grandiose, which is what I want from Star Wars. Episode 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, even with episode 4, which, didn't have a big budget. It was only $10 million. The movie was huge. It was far grander than this film was. And like even the shots, like the end shot with Luke on that island on Octo, that we find out the planet's name is Octo, which actually means brother in Hebrew. I don't know if that has any bearing. But anyway, he's on this, he's on that planet, and they do this. It's like, who's directing this? Is Russell Mulcahy directing this? The guy that directed Highlander? Because it's this big sweeping shot circling around. It doesn't feel like Star Wars at all. So The Force Awakens overall, maybe the reason why it's my least favorite of the bunch is it really doesn't feel like Star Wars. The only time it really, yes, it adds beautifully to Star Wars. It's a good movie. I'm not saying it's not a good movie, but a movie can be good and still be critiqued the fuck out of. Okay. The only point that I really felt like it was Star Wars is when Princess Leia showed up. I mean, Carrie Fisher was phenomenal in this, like best actor of the bunch. Okay. And best major character of the bunch too. And when you saw the Millennium Falcon, like at those 2 points, yeah, I felt like I was back in Star Wars. But the overall feel of the film was not Star Wars. I didn't think that at all. But enough of that. I want to get into, my favorite stuff here. Best character besides Princess or, General Organa. That's what she goes by in this. Besides her, honestly, I think it was Traitor. Traitor is that's kind of the nickname they're giving to that riot control stormtrooper that takes on Finn when Finn has the lightsaber outside of Maz Kanata's place. This is the guy, he has that Z6 stun baton that he kind of spins around and all that. They're calling him Traitor. It's TR-8R. That's the registry. And I had no idea. Like when I saw it, I was like, oh my God, finally somebody made a fucking weapon that could take on the lightsaber. This is great. And he was doing really good with it. Like that whole battle was awesome. And they're even making an action figure out of the guy because the guy's so popular. They're calling him kind of the Boba Fett of the movie, even though Captain Phasma was supposed to be the Boba Fett of the movie. And I'm disappointed Captain Phasma didn't do enough either. But Traitor, or TR-8R, was my favorite character of the bunch. That was awesome, that fight. The way he was taking on, the lightsaber without himself having a lightsaber was really cool. And it made sense because if the purpose of the First Order right now is to find Luke Skywalker and kill him or whatever, then you want your army being able to take on a guy with a lightsaber, as to where, for whatever reason, the Galactic Empire never did that. So that was probably my favorite character of the bunch. I love that Z6 stun baton, coolest weapon in Star Wars history, in my opinion, even though I know it's based off of like a police riot control stuff. I know that's not cool. I get it. I'm an anarchist. I understand. My other favorite thing out of that, the new Star Destroyer, the Resurgent class Star Destroyer, the finalizer that you see in the beginning, which kudos for them for keeping that in place to where, the opening of the movie is some giant, spaceship going by, or, before it was a shot of the Death Star or whatever, with episode 6. That was nice. But I thought that the TIE Fighter SFs, the Special Forces TIE Fighters, were so cool. And this gave a lot of credibility to the Star Wars universe. One of the things that made Heir to the Empire, or the Thrawn trilogy by Timothy Zahn back in the 90s, I think one of the things that made that so popular was because you realize that in the original trilogy, boy, the Empire is kind of stupid. Like it's really full of very dumb people. And the EU really, really changed that, because Thrawn's like, I can't believe the Empire, the Emperor didn't put shields on these fucking TIE fighters. Why didn't he put shields on these things? And so the First Order TIE fighters, a lot of them do have shields, and they are 2-seaters and all that. So I thought those black TIE fighters, best thing in the movie. like literally, I thought they were great. Really enjoyed that. Like I said, best music on the score was probably Snoke's theme. I thought that was, the whole theme that we think may also be just overall the theme for Darth Plagueis. That was great. Star Killer Base, obviously that was named after Star Killer, which was the original name for the lead character in older treatises of Star Wars. It's supposed to be Anakin Star Killer instead of Anakin Skywalker. It was a play on that. I didn't mind that. In fact, I know a lot of people, one of the major critiques for this film has been that, it's just a rehash of A New Hope. I don't think it's a rehash of A New Hope. I think it's a rehash of Tron Legacy, which is another Disney creation. I think Rey is pretty much like the Star Wars version of Korra. Somebody just transcribed that whole script. I see the similarities between A New Hope, but really it's a lot more than that. I don't agree with that. And I thought Star Killer Base was for what it is, it was awesome. That was a great idea. And the EU had certainly created, the Sun Crusher and all that, like weapons that were greater than the Death Star before. So that's nothing new to Star Wars. It was fine. Anyway, I think that's enough of that. If you have more questions, feel free to ask them. I'll talk Star Wars anytime, baby. Carpe Lucem, everybody. Hope you enjoyed the extended episode. I'll see you on the other side. And donate if you love it. Woo! ZOG.Ninja.
You just experienced Sovryn Tech. Go to sovryntech.com. That's SOVRYN tech.com. And connect with us there. Find links from today's show and catch our podcast feed. Sovryn Tech is copy heart. Copying art is an act of love, and love is not subject to law. So please share the show however you like. Welcome to the evolution.